You gotta love a champagne shower. You know, it's funny, Kurt, because back in the old days, you see those old photos. It's like no one was wearing goggles. That's like the biggest, that's like the biggest technical,
Yeah.
innovation. It seems like in the locker room post-game celebration. Corey Robinson, Kurt Helin taking over for the second hour, a brother from another. What did you think about that celebration?
It was fun. They were loud. By the way, they didn't even get into this. They were chanting, like, they ate it up. They started chanting the bleep you Draymond chant in the locker room as a kind of turning that whole thing on their heads from the Celtics fans. And then they asked Looney about it, and he's like, well, yeah, we did. He yelled at us too all year. Like, they were having fun with this thing all through it. They had such a belief that once they got that lead, once they got that huge lead on the 21-0 run, the 35-8 run, you could sense it in the building. Yeah, that there were going to be pushes. That this Celtics team, look, they were where they were because they never gave up all year. They kept getting back. They were not going to get back. They were in the Python's grasp at that point, right? Like the Warriors had this thing, and they were not. Curry was not going to let go. Draymond was not going to let go. And man, I will tell you, Corey, there is nothing in the building. Nothing sucks the life out of a building like an opponent's building. Like a deep Steph Curry three, man. Like when he hit that 1-3 in the third quarter, remember put him up 18, 20, whatever it was, but knocked it down from 35, 38 feet. You could just feel the life go out of the building like, oh, this is going to be one of those nights. And the fans were desperate for something to cheer for, and he really has that energy. They have that where they execute on the road, at home. I think that's the thing you take away when you watch them through these playoffs, or at least I did. On the road, at home, up, down, make a couple of mistakes, playing well, they keep executing relentlessly on their game plan. They don't give up. They don't change. They don't change who they are. They just keep doing it. And that's something the Celtics couldn't match. When the Celtics got tired, when the Celtics got worn down, Corey, or when they got in a little bit of trouble, suddenly it was riskier passes and maybe too much isolation, Jason Tatum. They got away from what worked. And I mean, Udoka would talk to him about it, and it didn't matter. They kind of just got in their head and got away. And there's something to be said for just knowing who you are. And Corey, don't you think did you get that out of the Warriors? They're like, they just know it.
Yeah, I mean, Steph Curry is who they are. And I love there were so many things that we need to go back to. First and foremost, I think the celebration and the fact that you're recording this in Boston right now. So you saw the games in Golden State, saw it in Boston. Let's just kind of back up before we get into Steph and how brilliant he is, Finals MVP, and just talk atmosphere. What was the atmosphere from Game 1, Game 2, all the way through? Can you give us a little taste of what it was like being on the ground, home and away?
I got to say, both of the atmospheres are great. This is one of the first times I heard Chase Center this loud, because it's not as – look, Oracle was one of those old cement buildings where just everything echoed around, right?
It was crazy. So it was one of my favorite places to watch a game. I went to Oracle one time, and I'll never forget, because I grew up in San Antonio, and San Antonio, in my personal opinion, is one of the best arenas in basketball. But like Oracle was up there for me. I was like, man, this is really special. I could not imagine what Chase is like.
It's a beautiful building, but it's more like a lot of, I mean, it's a nicer version, maybe, and a newer version, but inside it's the levels of boxes and the fancy seats, and it feels a little more like most arenas, if that makes sense. There's kind of a standardish design now, and there was still life in this thing. The fans there believed in this story so much. You could sense how much they wanted to see not only Steph Curry get a fourth ring, but Clay to get his, and for Jordan Poole and Andrew Wiggins' redemption story, and all, like, they really were in on this. The Boston fans, they were just loud, man. That building was intense. It was intense. It was, from the moment that they're playing Dropkick Murphys before tip-off, like, it is pretty much that atmosphere. It's a ballroom, and it's loud the whole time, and those fans were totally into it. It was both of them really great experiences. Boston's such a fun place to see a game and watch it spill out. And the best thing about the Boston fans is, like, I'm out to lunch today. I'm kind of sitting in a bar having lunch, just quietly listening to everybody, and they're like, yeah, the Warriors. Hey, what about the Red Sox? Did you see the A's Red Sox games? Like, they were ready. They're ready to go.
Yeah, it's funny, Kurt, because I was in the airport today. I'm in Birmingham for the USFL, and I saw someone wearing a Boston Celtics jersey in Philadelphia. And I just had to double check. I was just kind of like, I took a double take, and I kind of looked at him, and I was like, you guys just lost last night. So there was a part of me that was like, am I living in an alternate universe where Boston somehow won? Are we going to Game 7? And the other part of me is like, man, I love how Boston fans are just like, look, win or lose. Like, I wear my Spurs jersey. I was wearing it all playoffs. Like we were in it, and I was just wearing it around New York, and people were giving me the same look. So I think it's pretty amazing how they love their sports. But I will say, one of my favorite moments of the game was in the last minute and a half when the Boston fans left. Like, think about what Steph Curry did. Historic. Like, what Steph, he was shooting like 50% from the 3-point line, and he was taking the amount of threes was like 11, 14. I mean, it wasn't just 2 or 3. The volume, the efficacy, the brilliance, it was mastery. Like, we were watching Beethoven at the piano, right? And they left early. They didn't want to see him get his first finals MVP. I thought that was pretty interesting. I'm like, okay, that's one way to be a fan. They're pretty hardcore.
They are. They was pretty. I mean, there were a lot of fans who stayed. I don't know if they wanted to see Curry so much as like boo Draymond one last time, but like there were certainly some fans that stayed for the ceremony. But there was Curry's ability to, again, I don't know that this gets talked about enough. His conditioning. They went at him on defense, right? They tried to wear him down. He moves constantly off the ball, and it frankly took a few games for the Warriors, for the Celtics defenders to get used to. When he gives the ball up, you can't relax. He relocates, they get it right back to him, and he doesn't need much space. And that happened. It's one of the reasons I think fatigue started to get to the Celtics in the series. Not sure if that was talked about enough. 2 physical Game 7s. Tatum's young, Brown's young, but they were asked to play a lot of minutes this season. And they just looked mentally and physically worn down by the end. And Curry never stops. They are relentless. Their execution is relentless. They keep moving off the ball, giving up the ball, and getting it back. And he's going to sprint behind the pick and take the dribble handoff from Gary Payton or whoever grabs the offensive board. And they just don't quit. And I think that the Celtics, as much as they wanted to get there, they just didn't have that level of poise to keep executing when the chips were down. And that's, by the way, most teams don't. There's 29 other NBA teams that were not doing that this year.
Yeah, I think your earlier point was really well taken. You said that's just who the Warriors are, and who they are is Steph Curry. And I think what Steve Kerr said was really interesting about Steph. He compared him to Tim Duncan. You think about this is his 4th championship, 8 seasons. Think about what Tim did in San Antonio, right? Like, this actually kind of does, it's a similar arc, and they're both singular at their positions. Tim's the best power forward to ever play the game of basketball, and Steph, the best shooter ever. So it's a really, and I think the one thing that's really interesting too about that comp is that both of them make everyone else around them better, right? So that's the one thing I love about looking at the Spurs teams in the early aughts, and then this Warriors team, like how Andrew Wiggins came and got better, Jordan Poole came and got better, Andre Iguodala and Draymond Green, Klay Thompson. Like, it seems like if you are lucky enough to be in Steph's atmosphere, like if you're lucky enough to be in his orbit, then you win championships, you get paid, it seems like flowers bloom and they smell better. It seems like sun's a little bit brighter. I don't know. It just seems like that Steph quality it's just magic. And that was the same with Tim Duncan. If you're just lucky enough to be in the orbit, it's going to be good. It's going to be good. But I think with Boston, they are Jason Tatum. And we saw an inconsistent Jason Tatum because he's in his early 20s. So when you think about, like, how long did it take you to learn who Kurt Helin was?
I'm still figuring that out, dude. I'm still figuring that out.
And I think that's kind of what we have to realize is that there's an old saying in sports, we go as you go, but we can't go as you go if you don't know where you're going. Right. And I think that's kind of like where Steph Curry knows. He's very comfortable who he is. He plays the same way. It's joy. It's wonder. It's like playground basketball, similar to how Patrick Mahomes plays football. Right. It's just like all rules are out. You're amazing. Let's just like play ball again. So that's how Steph plays, and that's how the Warriors play. And you saw that joy.
You know
Andrew Wiggins, like everyone is like that, And the Celtics are still trying to figure it out because Jason's still trying to figure it out.
The other thing that Curry and Duncan have in common is that they're coachable. That they if you can coach your star hard, if Kerr can be the guy, and Popovich yelled at Duncan, right? Like the fact that Kerr can come in and coach Curry hard means he can do it. Not only just to Clay or Draymond or whoever, because Curry sets the tone. Everybody else, your role players, your Wiggins is going to find his role. Your young players are going to look at that, and if you're Gary Payton or you're Jordan Poole, you're like, well, that's the model. Like if Coach gets to yell at Curry, he can yell at me. He can yell at whoever. That isn't universal, right? Like there's plenty of teams in plenty of sports where you have got to tiptoe around the star, man. They were different.
Yeah, especially in today's NBA.
Yeah. Look, you played high level athletics. I imagine you were on a team or two where there were coaches trying to tiptoe a little bit.
And I think it's different though, because in football, I played football at Notre Dame, and in football there are so many of us. There's like 100 of us, So but I think that's the one thing about basketball in the NBA, particularly where you have younger guys coming in and they already are celebrities. Like look at Zion, he had presidents coming to watch him play basketball in college. That's a whole different level. That's like Beatles level celebrity, think about that. Like Jerry Seinfeld and President Obama are watching an 18-year-old play basketball. Like that's a whole other level of celebrity. And you come into the league that way, and then you sign a quarter of a $1 billion contract. And I think that's a little different than, playing Notre Dame football. So I think that's like where you have the refreshing take that is Golden State. And I think that's why they've been so successful in this environment, because you have all these young players trying to figure it out and trying to be rock stars, right? And then you have basketball players who are playing basketball and being coachable, and Steph's like, this is the way I go. And like you said, if Steve Kerr can coach Steph hard, then what excuse does Otto Porter Jr. have? What excuse does Andrew Wiggins have? What excuse? He's one of the 75 greatest players of all time. You look at the list, he's the all-time three-point shooter in the game. Like it's just, if he can do it, then everyone else has to fall in line. And that's the beautiful thing about sports. It's very much like dominoes. And it really helps when Steph Curry's the first domino. It just really helps. One thing I want to bring to your attention, though, there was that stat that I thought was really interesting. 0 for 9 in Game 5. And we talked about this in PBT Extra. You said Steph Curry is going to come back with a vengeance. That stat line in Game 6, I'm just going to read it to you, okay? 40 minutes of play, 34 points, Kurt. He was 12 for 21 from the floor. So he's shooting 57% from the floor, 6 for 11 from 3. That's 54.5% from three-point range. That's incredible. And 7 rebounds, 7 assists. So what is that mentality when you see a goose egg in the three-point column for Steph Curry in an NBA Finals?
You knew that was just an off night, and he came out with his finger wrapped. I mean, there were probably excuses and things he would never talk about, but you knew that wasn't going to last, that he was going to work through that. And it ended up like, well, the problem is if you blitz him, especially when Draymond is playing the way he played in Game 6, which was his best game of the series, hit a couple threes, had 12 points, and Wiggins got in this role a little too. You blitz him, and they make that short roll pass, and suddenly it's Draymond or Wiggins standing at the free throw line, at the nail, with the ball, and shooters everywhere. And that I felt a little bit for Boston. I felt a little bit for Tatum, because he would get into the paint and be playing in a crowd, and he didn't have as many shooters to go to. Like their shooting is not as consistent. They've got some guys, but it's not. You don't fear them the way you fear literally everybody who steps on the floor for the Warriors that isn't Looney, right? Like everybody not named Looney, you better cover them out at the arc. Tatum didn't have that, and you could kind of tell that they struggled, and I think it's one of the things you'll see them add. Look, every team needs to add shooting, but I think for Boston, if you're going to play inside out and attack like that, you got to add shooting. You've got to have people to balance your Currys, man.
Yeah, I mean, Robert Horry with the Lakers, Steve Kerr with the Bulls. Like everyone has their go-to shooter to kick it out to. And you're right, that game one I thought was a really great case study for Jason Tatum because he did not play very well offensively as far as point production, but he was dishing out assists. And I thought that was the way that I thought the series was going to be something like that, where it was going to be back and forth, game after game after game. Tatum gets everyone else involved. Robert Williams is the defensive factor he is. And then it's just kind of like a chess match that then goes 7 games. And that's not what we saw. And for some reason, you mentioned it, Tatum started playing in traffic. He wasn't able to identify, his shooters. They weren't making shots. Al Horford it was like a drought for Horford, which was interesting. We saw these huge games against the Bucks. He just exploded. And then this past in game 6 too, it looked like we might see a big Horford night. There was an earlier game too in this series where he flashed again. And I thought, okay, this is it. Like game 5, he made that big 3, gave him the lead. And I thought, oh, third quarter, Horford making threes, wide open shooter. We saw this movie. Like they're gonna steal this one. And it wasn't enough. Why wasn't it enough?
It was not. It was not.
Yeah, so that's one thing I'm a little interested in to see how the Celtics move forward. I think you're right. They're going to have to get some shooters.
Hey, thanks for watching Brother from Another on YouTube. Make sure you hit subscribe before you leave, and be sure to watch us 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time on Peacock. Appreciate you.